Great. Let's bring in right now Democratic Senator from Indiana and member of the Senate Banking Committee, Senator Bayh. Senator, 100 days and Arlen Specter, a big old gift for the Democratic Party. How excited are you to have Arlen Specter on your side?
Well, it's a nice exclamation point to the president's first 100 days. So for things that he was inclined to agree with us on, Joe, it's going to be very helpful in terms of avoiding filibusters. But the man announced he was changing parties, not principles or positions. So I think it's possible to overstate this. Good development, but it's not as if it's just going to be clear sailing.
But that puts more pressure on senators like yourself from swing states, from traditionally red states. Yourself, Ben Nelson, Claire McCaskill. A lot of your voters are going to be looking at you to be a leveling wind against some of the more left-wing provisions that are being passed through House and Senate bills.
Well, they want us to do what's right, regardless of party. And I think Arlen was under a lot of pressure in his caucus to sort of bend his beliefs. There was a practical element involving the primary he was going to have to run in as well, but now he's free to vote his conscience, and I think people like myself, Ben Nelson, will do the same.
Right.
I tend to vote with my party, you know, on the vast majority of things, Joe, but on fiscal issues, I do tend to be a little more conservative on spending and debt and deficits and things like that.
Let's go up to New York. Carlos Watson is up there. Carlos, you have a question for the senator.
I do. Senator Bayh, do you think we'll see any movement on entitlement reform later this year or early next, given, as you said, your concern and the concern of Senator Nelson and others about the growing deficits?
Carlos, I do, and my guess is, and I've not been told this by anyone in the administration, but my guess is that next year, once the economy has begun to gather some momentum, and those were terribly bad numbers we just heard about the shrinkage of the economy in the first
6.1%.
Yeah, that's
wow, that is tough.
That is tough. Hopefully next year, once we've turned the corner, there is beginning to be some self-sustaining momentum in the economy. My guess, Carlos, is the president will look at entitlement reform to try and get the deficits and the debts under control, because in the out years, not this year, next year, but in the out years, it's unsustainable. It'll harm the middle class by burdening us with those kind of debts. So that's the longest yes you've ever heard, Carlos.
Pat Buchanan.
Right, with that 6.1% decline in GDP, that means revenues are going to fall and expenditures are going to increase. We've already got, what, a $1.8 trillion deficit in this fiscal year. That could go up to $2 trillion.
You know, Pat, it's a breathtaking number, and even the Chinese are beginning to balk a little bit about how much money they've lent us, talking about putting their resources into other vehicles other than U.S. dollar assets. So, but this year and next year, to get through the deficit, most economists, even conservative ones, would say, look, you got to pursue a stimulative policy. It's the years after that, when we've begun to recover, the deficit will still be unacceptably large. Ben Bernanke came to talk to the Democratic caucus this last week. He said that in any year it is dangerous to have the deficit greater than 2% of GDP. In no year will it be less than 3% of GDP under the current forecast. So that creates a real problem.
And that even suggests 4% year growth, which is unacceptable.
Yeah, it's 13% this year.
And that gets back to Carlos's question. And the president did have the fiscal responsibility summit down at the White House. That shows that he's not oblivious to these things. He does care. My guess is that once we've dealt with health care, some of these other things, the economy has started to turn around. We've got to deal with this.
But he tried to get Social Security and Medicare talked about at that fiscal responsibility summit. Nancy Pelosi said no.
I mean, it's one thing to have a summit. It's another thing to put some sort of structure in place that deals with this.
Well, there are two entities outside of Congress that get the ultimate vote on this. The first is called the bond market. I mean, interest rates will go up. That will put the pressure on the economy. We could be setting ourselves up for perhaps something you remember very well. It's called stagflation. We don't want that, and we're going to get that if we don't deal with these debts and deficits. That's number one. The second group are the international lenders who lend us the money. They're starting to say, enough already. You Americans don't have your policy. They don't want us to be like Argentina and inflate our way out of the problem.
Let me go to Carlos and then you, Pat. Carlos.
Senator Bayh, just to follow up, one quick question on that. Do you think that moderate senators like yourself might, instead of waiting for the White House, offer your own proposal ahead of the 2010 elections? Or said differently, do people like you have to have something like that on the table before you face the voters again?
Members of Congress, Carlos jumping out in front on Social Security and Medicare reform?
Hey, yes, we can. Yes, we will.
Not going to happen.
I suppose anything's possible, but to seriously address your question, I think many of us are concerned about the economic consequences of the debts, the deficits piling up at the rate that they are. We're going to look for some restraint on discretionary domestic spending and entitlement reform. But the honest answer to your question is we'll be willing to support the president on that, but it's going to take some executive leadership.
Some real leadership.
Pat
Buchanan, we're going to break, but quick question.
Are you going to have to sacrifice some of your own programs to cut this thing back? I mean, Obama's going full speed ahead with everything.
Sacrifice in terms of never do them? No, Pat. In terms of moderating our appetite to phase it in a way that's fiscally acceptable, we might have to do some of that.
All right. Evan Bayh, neighbor, thank you so much.
Very
Good to be
nice
with you, my
to see
friend.
you.